So let me introduce, first of all, Jasper Rural, who is the co-founder of the Analog Astronaut community. What is an analog astronaut? Well, you're going to find out. I consider myself an analog astronaut. So why don't I start claiming that the first Jamaican analog astronaut? I have much more training to do. I certainly can't dive. I certainly can't fly a plane. But I can certainly work on this thing that I'm passionate about, which is how will we share life in other celestial bodies, like life on the moon. I'm very active in trying to build out more participation in the Moon Village Association. And my whole journey to this day started when I wrote a one-woman show called Moon Runnings, The Life and Times of the First Jamaican on the Moon. And that was set in the future, 2034, 2038. So I can say that I still may be the first Jamaican on the moon in 2038. Certainly if I stick with the community, the Analog Astronaut community, Jasper is co-founder of with Dr. Cyan Proctor, will get there. So she'll be speaking about what she's doing. And then I'm going to ask Dr. Charles Moniki, who has been roped in. He has signed on to lead the team in Kenya at the Machakos University. I'm very excited. Last year we launched Space from Ghana. We launched the Oasis project. And so Dr. Moniki is going to be very much at the helm of some of the research we'll be doing, which is really about educating African engineering students to think about space sustainability, space settlement, and its implications for addressing the challenges that they're facing on Earth and in remote parts of Africa. So I'm excited about that. So let me begin by asking Jasper to talk about the Analog Astronaut community, where it stands today, and what are their plans as a starting point.
Thanks, Claire. And I'm rooting for you to be the first Jamaican in space. That would be incredible. So the Analog Astronaut community. So this is something, as you said, that Dr. Cyan Proctor and I kind of built out in 2020. And the idea for this really was to have a centralized hub, a place where everyone can go to discuss what's going on in analog research and analog activities. And every year we have a conference in May at Biosphere 2 where we gather the community together and we basically work towards our common goals. And so really the foundation, which is to create, is to drive forward the needs of the community. So the community is striving towards advancing human spaceflight. The research that analog astronauts do during analog missions, so analog just being similar to real space missions. So you have these habitats around the world which simulate space habitats, and people go to these habitats and they live and they work as if they were living and working in space. So that's why we call them analog astronauts, because it's similar to what a real astronaut might do in a real space habitat. And a lot of the research that's being done on these missions is very, very important. There's a lot of academic research affiliated with universities. There's a lot of research that's affiliated with some space agencies, private companies, industry, and also in the world of like sustainability. Analogs are a great place to understand resource management because you're working in a very, very constrained environment. And so there's some really beneficial knock-on effects to applications here on Earth as well.
Okay, awesome. So Dr. William Edwards has joined us. So while he settles in, I'm going to ask Dr. Charles Moniki, who is the Dean of the School of Engineering at Machakos University, and very thankfully I signed on to lead our team at Machakos for the Africa Space Exploration Analog project that we are launching in Northern Kenya. But Dr. Moniki, could you introduce yourself and the beginnings of the work? I say beginnings of the work because I think you're just looking at space as a new thing, but again, as an engineering school that's long-standing, and yourself being an electrical engineer, I know you have a lot of ideas about how Africa can participate in areas such as robotics and remote control. I have to say before he comes on, we just finished a session that dealt with space sustainability. And one of the issues that came out of that session was the need for African engineering schools as they build out capacity on training to, whether it's to design satellites, CubeSats, whatever, to do satellite demonstrations or to run satellites from the universities, from their countries, to build in the capacity to do space sustainability. Certainly, if we're talking about analog astronauts and creating a simulation, such as we're planning to do in the northern part of Kenya in the desert, we are very big on talking about remote issues and sustainability in terms of waste management and having a circular system. But Dr. Charles, if you could tell us more about what you're doing at Machakos and about the engineering school and how the engineering school sees itself as driving space education for engineers and scientists in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claire and the members. My name is Charles Moniki, and I'm a senior lecturer at the Machakos University, and also I'm the Dean School of Engineering and Technology. Good evening here. It is evening, but back there it's noon, so I've just come from a long day. That's why I'm having a cup of tea so that I can refresh myself. Now, Machakos University has School of Engineering and Technology, and we have departments of electrical and electronic engineering. We also have a department of computing and information technology, where we create synergy towards the technology. We are not very old, but we are 7 years old since we became a university. But Machakos University is very, very keen to explore on areas that no other university is venturing into. We have about 38 universities in Kenya, and very few universities are venturing into space technology. So Machakos University, we want to have a niche over any other university so that we can create our own space, even in space there. So apart from University of Nairobi that has tried to venture into space, Machakos University is very, very keen. I think just before COVID, we had started a program where we were creating capacity in astronautics. And we had a few of our students trying to construct a small satellite with the help of a university in Italy called Sapienza University. And we had tried to work together. And we had just started making a small CubeSat. But now when COVID came, that collaboration a bit got affected. But we are not discouraged. We are very ready to venture into that. And we have students who are very, very willing. Already we have about 20 students who want to come up, who want to form a club. Actually, they are looking for a name, they can call it, because they want to really venture into space. So we have the capacity and we have the will, and I know that together we will also create our presence felt in space. So briefly, that's my introduction, and we are happy to be in this forum, Future Sense Forum, and we are upbeat. We want to be known and want to be seen up there very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very happy that Machakos actually signed an agreement with us to help us do the OASIS project. We would very much like to make sure that the students at Machakos are part of any analog mission going forward that we're doing. So it's really good to have an institutional home and an institutional partner that has capacity. Let me just say that Machakos is in a semi-arid region of Kenya. And so many of the challenges that they face are also relevant to the challenges in the desert region of Kenya, which doesn't have a university. So we're hoping that we can also help bridge that gap for the northern parts of Kenya where there's nothing. So the whole education and workforce development, luckily because of COVID, more people are comfortable doing stuff online. and I think opportunities will arise. So Zahir Ali has joined us. I'll ask him to turn on his mic and kind of get more settled and hearing where the conversation is going. And let me introduce Dr. William Edmondson, who is a co-founder of Max IQ Space. He's a former professor. And William, if you could talk about, we already had a really great introduction to Max IQ Space itself, but I'd like you to speak more about what your work is in related to HBCUs and building out capacity in the HBCU community here in the United States of America. So the floor is yours. Unmute, please.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. And I'm glad to be here because actually, since we probably last talked, my role has expanded to not only HBCUs, but also Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
So not only am I one of the founders of Max IQ, which is a space tech company, space ed tech company, but my work with University of Florida is very much in line with workforce development, particularly of space systems. There we are developing a curriculum which is multidisciplinary. So it goes beyond aerospace to bring in the science and the engineers, the business majors, with a curriculum that we can actually is portable. So, Dr. Mwaniki, if I misspelled that or mispronounced that, my apologies. We have a program that we could actually sell you a curriculum. It could either be a summer type full intensive, or it can be you developing a space science and engineering, where we bring in the systems, we bring in looking at satellites, not as a mechanical or aerospace system, but as a what I call a cyber physical system, because with all complex systems, they're actually being controlled by some type of processing element. And with that understanding, you sort of get a different view on how to design satellites or any space asset.
What is exciting about the people in this room is that we have a couple of physics people here and a couple of engineers. I think Jack is a physicist, Zahir is a physicist, and both Charles and William are engineers. So we have a really nice mix, and they're working at different levels. So as you heard, Jas is working with professionals who are normally out of school and are doing this as mostly hobbyists who want to be astronauts, and they're very, but there's not this. This is not like a casual hobby. It's a serious hobby to be an analog astronaut. And that's exciting. Dr. Charles is in the educational system. And William, you are an external partner of educational systems. And now we're going to hear from Zahir Ali, who is doing what I call the professional executive development, because everybody is new to space in a large extent. I mean, the space economy is growing. So I asked Zahir Ali to talk about the work that he's doing through the ASU Thunderbird Executive Space Education Program. Zahir.
Hi there, and thank you, Dr. Nelson, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to work with your organization and be part of a team that's trying to move the needle on access and relevance of space for everyone in the world. My university, I changed my background to show our global headquarters is Thunderbird School of Global Management, which is now also part of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise. And our school was founded on excelled in sustainable prosperity. And space is, of course, absolutely critical to all of that. There are no borders in space, but the imaginary lines are being drawn right now. At the same time as we're trying to stand up an industry and really make it independent of the nationalist mentalities that pervade it at this point and make it more truly commercial. Myself and Professor Greg Autry, who co-run the program at Thunderbird, we created this due to market demand. Both of us are very well connected to the executive set within both traditional and new space. And one of the resounding requests was, we need more people who understand business and are strong in that, but also can understand space. And we need our space people, our engineers, our physicists, our scientists, our tech writers, everybody, you know, from the welder and the guy, you know, mopping the floor with special solution, all the way up to the design physicist and what have you. They need to be more business savvy. And so we created this program, Space Executive Masters in Global Management, Space Business Leadership and Policy. Feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in more information. We offer both an executive degree and an executive certificate. The degree is 1 year and the certificate is 1 week. Very different. One's a boot camp, one's a full degree. But it's meant to address and stand parallel and complementary to what my colleagues are doing, including Dr. Edmondson, for example, in terms of bringing the technical, the business, and really that transdisciplinary aspect that space drives us to together. And one of the things we're very focused on is the emergence of you know, African nations, India, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, as not only interesting, but very realistically, that India, China, India and Africa alone are going to represent a third of the population of the world, almost 50% of the population of the world by 2040 that is under 40. So these are real markets, real people who are brilliant, but as the stories like that of Ramunajan describe, they lack access, they lack infrastructure. It shouldn't take some fancy professor at Oxford, you know, finding. I mean, a needle in a haystack is even silly. To find somebody like Ramunajan was miraculous. It shouldn't take miracles for us to create a capacity in these nations, in these developing countries, and leverage that for humanity. So that's where our head is at, and we are advocating a lot of various projects. The Equatorial Spaceport in Kenya, for example, a spaceport in Puerto Rico, the Waikul Space Society, Ecuador joined the Artemis Accords that was engineered by one of my graduates, Robert Daillon. So across the board, what our view is that we need to focus as a community on optimizing what the developed nations are doing, but then leveraging that to enable the rapid capacity building and coming up to speed of the developing nations. And I feel that in this group, if we think about it that way, we can find some actionable insights amongst our community. I'll stop there.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So I want to go back to JAS, because the Analog Astronaut Conference is coming up. And one is that they came up with as a big idea, which addresses the issue of going beyond the nationalistic tendencies. A lot of the people in the analog astronaut community are very mindful that we cannot do space the way we have done the last 500 years of colonization and conquest. And so I'd like JAS to talk about the world's biggest analog, and not just about what it is, but what are some of the potential broader implications if we do it right, and not just this, let's say, if it's 15 of us doing it, 15 analog groups doing it, but how do we do it in such a way that University of Florida now can be a part of it, even though they may not have a whole analog. Certainly from the Caribbean perspective, I am now trying to figure out how to bring the Caribbean in, having just come from Jamaica, and the young people did a hackathon, and I like to tell them, guys, your execution was not the best, but I have to say, the ideas you came up with I was impressed, right? So I'm a little bit optimistic that we can train them to do the execution part of things, but I know the talent for understanding and visioning and creating is there. So just let's talk a little more about the world's biggest analog and some of the potential tie-ins to universities in Africa, what Zahir is doing, what William is doing here in the United States. And I'm happy to hear Pacific Islanders are in the house, because now the Caribbean islands and Puerto Rico have a place to hang out with. Just the floor is yours.
Thanks, Claire. Everything everybody here is doing is such important work, and what Zahir said about the national boundaries is basically one of the things that the world's biggest analog is, I guess, trying to address, in the sense of, well, I'll start from the beginning. The world's biggest analog is going to be a networked analog mission conducted in 2025. So we're taking all the habitats around the world and we're running one month-long simulation. And the idea is to answer the question, how are we going to live and work in space? Not as individuals, but as a collective community, as humanity. So it's going to be, you know, eventually, very soon, there's going to be a permanent presence on the moon. There's already a permanent presence in space, and eventually, who knows, Mars as well. And it's not just going to be NASA and big companies like SpaceX. It's going to be a lot of different companies, a lot of different national agencies from all over the world, lots of different countries. And so the key to this is collaboration. And that's what we're hoping to answer with the world's biggest analog, is how we collaborate. So we're running a collaborative research program. All the research that's going to be done has to be done across all the habitats, and they have to share the data with each other. So that's one of the keys, is the communication and the collaboration. But one of the other important things that we're trying to do with the world's biggest analog is also an education and outreach program. And we're trying to target underserved communities as much as possible. And we want to involve as many countries as possible in the world's biggest analog. Countries who don't necessarily even have analogs at the moment. It doesn't matter if you don't have an analog program, you can still be involved in the education side of things. And we're going to try and make that as accessible as possible. So there'll be elements of rolling something out physically in classrooms, but that's not accessible to a lot of people. So we'll have an online education program as well. And that's what we're trying to build out and work towards at the moment. So basically the idea behind it, as we've been discussing, is to kind of break down those national borders to help some of the countries who haven't already got analogs in place, to help them maybe either develop an analog habitat or even just get some of the curriculum into schools and to younger people and into the communities.
Thank you. So Dr. Charles and Dr. Edmondson, you're both in the university space in terms of working directly with students, developing coursework, etc. And Dr. Charles, definitely, we have put in a bid to be a potential research project. I'm not sure if we'll be chosen, but certainly the Oasis project in Africa, we want to be very visible in the analog. From your perspective, as a new entrant, right? I do think there's even some lessons that we can bring to the world's biggest analog process, as I think the selection is going to be made this year. So we have a year now of developing, working together, because if we're talking about space for everyone everywhere, and we have cultural differences in how we approach research, we have time differences, there's a lot of things we have to do as a planetary, let's say, species to prepare to ensure that a moon village exists on the moon will actually be a moon village where all humans have an opportunity to be a part of observing, participating, and having a say in. So I'd love to hear from both of you, and then I'll come to Zahir from an industry perspective. As you're hearing about the world's biggest analog as probably a way in which we can now cohere, right? We need some coherence globally. And this is important because the UN Summit of the Future is happening and the space community is not at that table. So I try to introduce it to every meeting I go to, that this is space futures as part of our global planetary futures. So I think the world's biggest analog could serve as part of this coherence of creating the planetary consciousness at the grassroots level. Most of the people in our community are not, the admirals or the defense department chairs, etc. They're regular people who are living and working in regular jobs, right? Some are engineers, some are business people, some are psychologists, some are healthcare workers. I was hearing this. How are you seeing the work you're doing? And let's start with Dr. Edmondson first and go to Dr. Charles. Dr. Edmondson, you are working with a university in Florida. They are not going to probably have a mission, but how are you seeing a potential for getting engaged in a project like this? Could you unmute, please? Yeah.
So it's University of Hawaii that I'm working with. And what's interesting about Hawaii is that on one of the islands, they actually have an analog.
Right.
And two, I think coming this fall, we will have a program for undergrads similar to the one we have for satellite systems. We'll have an education program that's multidisciplinary, that's transdisciplinary, four-year program to train students on how to live, how to design and develop products and processes off orbit. So I mean on the moon, on the Mars. And so that's how we are engaging your question. And so it's really about getting students excited and knowing their place, but also in terms of diversity is bringing a diverse group with diverse ideas. You know, with diverse.
For those schools that are not yet, say, members of some of these international associations, and some of them have a cost to entry, how can we get those universities that are not yet, let's say, members of IAC or IAF, and everybody has you have to pay to enter these things. Is there any beginning, like say, a network that exists that you know about here, just in the States alone?
Besides yours? Besides the Future Forum? I mean,
that's why I'm trying to build this place Futures Forum. And here, let me just say, I'm really now, based on the conversation we had, Dr. Ja was on our last call. He was talking about the challenges of talking about circular space economy. And I said, you know what? I am going to see if I can write a little module on space futures, which will introduce these challenges for the future. And I'm going to try and see if I can impose even that in what Zahir is doing with professionals and impose it in the universities that you are working on, William. So we do everything at the same time. Certainly I'm trying to impose it in the analog astronaut community because I'll be doing a mini workshop at the conference in May. Dr. Charles, you are there in Kenya, which is an emerging space country. They have not yet signed the Artemis Accords. I know they're being courted fiercely by the US government to sign. What does a university like you, when you hear about the world's biggest analog, which you have heard about it before because you are going to be the lead on the project coming out of Kenya, what are you thinking about really that you would like to get out of it? Why you have jumped feet first into this as a starting point for getting young people mindset first engaged in something that's bigger than just the small university in semi-rural Kenya? Unmute, please. Unmute.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Claire and members. Yes, Machakos University, we are new entrants into space science. We don't have any analog, but we are aware there are analogs that exist. And as Machakos University, as I said in the beginning, we are about 7 years since we were given a charter, and we want to go outside the normal, or outside the norm, because very few universities are venturing into space science. And we want to make it as one of our niche areas. We want to have, when Machakos University is mentioned, we be identified with space science. And therefore, as the Dean, School of Engineering, this is an area that we really want to be known for. Yes, we are a new entrant, but with collaboration with other institutions which have been in this for a long time. An example is where Dr. William, that is it called the University of Florida? Oh, yeah, if they have been in this for a long time, we are very much willing to collaborate and see how we can start even small. We were thinking of coming up with a curriculum because we don't have a curriculum yet for space science, but we have other related programs. One of it is Bachelor of Science, Electrical and Electronics, where they deal with sensors and microcontrollers and all that. They also do power electronics, all those areas that any satellite would require. We also have Department of Mechanical Engineering, where now when it comes out to the mechanical parts, we have courses that are related to that. So we intend to start small as we develop curriculum, because we don't want to wait until we have curriculum in place. We want to start with what we have, where we are. Then if we want to make a baby steps forward, we are going to do that. So we don't want to wait until we have the curriculum, although curriculum is part of our plans, but we are going to have a curriculum in space science. But even before...
Let me just remind you, because you might have forgotten. So last year when we had the space conference and the outreach, and we went out to the desert to look for spaces to do this, to do the analog in Kenya, we visited the desert, we visited a couple of sites that we might want to pick. But one of the things the students from Machakos did, they participated in a hackathon, and we gave them the rules around designing a facility. And they were supposed to look at the energy system. And I was very excited about what they came back with in terms of an integrated energy, which had biomass, right? So the question about recirculation of waste from humans, that was in their response. It was a 24-hour hackathon, right? They had 24 hours to look at it. So they had our integrated system, had biomass, they had solar, because they thought about the desert. They thought, okay, we can use wind, but there's no wind on the moon, so that was like a backup system. And then they also had a piezoelectric, so using human. So they said astronauts have to exercise while they're on the moon, so therefore, to keep their body thing up, so we can turn it into energy as well for the lighting, etc., of the habitat. And so with that, I feel very confident that as we think about creating educational opportunities and very quickly being able to support emerging space nations that may not have fancy laboratories, may not have fancy equipment, I felt based on their response with what they have, and let me tell you, it was a nightmare even trying to listen to them because the internet kept going down and all these other dramas, right? The fact of the matter is that they were still able to present and maintain their cool and present in a way that made me very confident that there is an opportunity for humanity to benefit actually from the fact that they are coming from behind and have to leapfrog. One of the big challenges that we're facing is the cost of the science. India was able to get to the moon at a much cheaper cost than they got to the moon from NASA, right? So can you imagine if we're talking about space settlement and we're able to get universities which are like emerging countries that are used to operate with very little stuff? I think we're going to get some really fantastic designs coming that are affordable for actually the settlement question and the energy questions and the robotics questions and the other systems that, yes, they don't have to build a rocket or a shuttle. Perhaps they can focus on these other questions. So I'm going to ask Zahir to kind of weigh in, because you have a really broad vision of how the sector is going. How are you seeing a network like the world's biggest analog now serving as a sort of a hub around which universities can now begin to support these systems, and then industry can come in and help support and then borrow from some of what the learnings are. Because in the world biggest analog, one of the big challenges we're facing as a community is not enough private sector support. We need to have more industry support for this work, and we want to build these partnerships as part of our work.
So this is, of course, always a challenge. And one of the things that we focus on in our program is where is the commercial applicability of these activities? And as programs like Axiom's Sovereign Astronaut program evolve, what you're starting to see is a privatization of national outcomes. And that's very powerful, because what that's saying is that, yes, the ultimate source of the money is a government, but rather than the government trying to run an astronaut program, they're outsourcing that capability to a commercial company. Over time, that commercial company becomes more robust because these governments are effectively paying a non-recurring engineering cost for those company-grade programs that they can then turn around and leverage to people who are going to put, biological researchers in space without qualifying them in the same way that NASA qualifies every astronaut to be able to do, at some level, almost everything on a mission. That's not sustainable as this economy expands, right? Just like today, a doctor doesn't have to know how to fix his surgical assistant to a robot. There's a technician for that. He shows up, he does his surgery, uses a robot. That's not how space works today. So it's going to be really important for the world, the biggest analog, to create outcomes that directly say, this is how our analog is supporting the commercialization of space. This is how analog training, analog programs are a stepping stone in the training process for commercial astronauts who are purely commercial, right? Because what we have, we're at a very challenging, it's exciting, but it's also a very challenging time. You've got folks like Dr. Edmondson creating programs that we can see the need for in the future. But at this juncture, we also need to make sure that our students, when they come out of, whether it's they're paying as a semi-hobby for an analog astronaut experience, or if they're paying for a degree, that there is an outcome for them based off of those actions on the backside of all that effort and time and money spent. If not, it doesn't matter how much we inspire people, we'll always be aspirational rather than operational. And so from my perspective, when we are thinking about how we connect industry needs to be invited in the right ways. And we need to ask the question as academics, as university leaders, as researchers to industry, very frankly, what are you willing to pay for? What outcomes do you need us to generate that are of a value to you that you're going to write me a check for to support these activities? We need to there's nothing wrong with that. It's not Philip Morris influencing cancer researchers, okay? This is different. This is cooperative engineering, science, technology research, so that they can have access to all the IP you're going to generate, all these amazing students. It creates pipelines on funding. It creates pipelines on employment. But it's up to folks like Jas and others who are bringing this amazing, amazing concept together. It's so powerful. But as you do it, working with industry, and some of that's going to be directly to corporate entities. But a lot of that, in my opinion, one of the best ways is to work through societies like the ACSP, Association for Commercial Space Professionals, work with a new body that's being stood up on the medical side, OSMET, that I think Jas and other folks on this call might know some of the founders of that. So working through the professional societies that will bring the commercial folks in, the Commercial Space Federation, and I'm thinking about ones I know in the US very well. I'm frankly always hesitant to invite the most bureaucratic organizations like the IAC or IAF, or WEF, or the WEF, or the folks from COP, because we don't need talking heads. We need people who are going to write checks. We need people who are going to turn bolts. We need people who are going to employ students. And we need to just move on from anybody who's not going to do any of those, who's not going to do those things. We don't need moral support. We need direct support. So going with that type of very sharp messaging, is, in my opinion, the right thing to do. And also be very sharp about helping the commercial side of things really understand, if they put $1 in here on these types of projects, we're semi-academics or fully academics, we're researchers, how is that $1 going to turn into 10 for them on their top line in their next quarterly? If we don't connect those dots for them, we cannot assume they're going to connect those dots. We have to do it for them. We have to crunch it for them. We have to walk them through that process. And that's why I'm so focused sharply on, I'm a physicist by training, and I spent much of my life doing science for the sake of science, and I loved it. But what I quickly learned to survive was that I had to connect the dots for the folks with the checkbooks. And so that's part of what we even do in our degree, is try to really help people understand that. That's why I demand that we had at least 2 or 3 salespeople into every cohort, because we need that thought process. We need the marketing people. And we as researchers, semi-academics, we need to go to that commercial community speaking their language. Otherwise, we have a communication mismatch, and it's too hard to, and nobody knows how to engage. So I'll stop there, because we can also talk about government and other things. But Dr. Nelson, you specifically asked me to consider the commercial side, and it has to be how it's going to affect their top line and their bottom line. Talent pipelines, DEI, all these things, they're nice to have. But let's be very clear. The corporate officers of an organization have a fiduciary to the shareholders first, as defined in America. In Europe, it's a little different, but the corporate governance is very clear. Shareholder primacy. So if we don't speak to that, and how that is going to be created for those people, then we're never going to really move them.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because one of the concerns, I know that NASA right now is funding a lot of the underserved communities in terms of HBCUs or Asians or Native tribes. And I was very delighted, Dr. Edmondson, at saying you're working with the Pacific institutions, because I have been saying we need to find a way to work more with the tribal institutions as well in the US construct, right? We've got to find a way to bring that indigenous knowledge in, bring them to the table. Some of them do have rights of their own to space, right? And so that education factor has to be done. We're looking at Africa, for example. I wasn't able to get, I was trying to get Mauritius and Maldives on one of the earlier sessions, because they're both are having space conferences this year. And I'm like, okay, these are very small islands, and they're both trying to have international space conferences in the same month. How is this going to work? And none of them are having an online portion. So we have to find a way to ensure that this knowledge community, right? So the Space Futures Forum, we have an online group on LinkedIn. I've been trying to get people to join me, do these 2 major events every year. And I happen to be plugged into different groups. I'm plugged in with Jazz, I'm plugged in with William, I'm plugged in with Zahir, I'm plugged in with Charles. So I'm plugged into these spaces because I naturally see the world as an ecosystem. That's how my brain naturally thinks. And I see how we can accelerate, right, this idea of not just talking about space for everyone everywhere. Everybody says it, but where are the actual opportunities for this exchange to happen? And how do we ensure that we're bringing as many people along? Hence my saying, hey, there's going to be a world's biggest analog. Africa and Caribbean have to be there somehow, somewhere, and inserting myself in the process. So as we begin to come to a closure around this topic, I'd love to now hear, like, I like to always leave with an actionable insight. I like to leave with something that we can say, okay, coming out of this, here is something that we can make happen. We know that the world's biggest analog is still thinking through the educational partnership process, right? So maybe there's an opportunity there that we can have a mini working group that will be part of their team with someone like a Dr. Edmondson, someone like Dr. Charles, because he's part of the Africa AFCONSAT group. Edward Mensah, who's the other person in West Coast, was not able to be here. Dr. Damoa, who is our other person who is both here in the US and in Ghana. By the way, Ghana will be the host for Space in Ghana this year. So we're going to be in Ghana this year for the conference. How can we support this educational process so that if we had this working group and we can prevail upon Zahir, for example, to come back and just give us some key pointers in how do we make sure that when we do this event next year, it doesn't fall on deaf ears, right? We have to do it, even though so we still want to do it in such a way that they take notice, right? If that's all we can accomplish, it's still an accomplishment. So, Jazz, I'd like you to kind of mull over that while I ask Dr. Edmondson to mull over, okay, World Biggest Analog might be new to you. I didn't mention it to you when I've spoken before, but I know you're all hand at, mix and matching. How do you see possibility of bringing your networks of universities to begin to support this process, so at least rather than just the 5 that they know, we now have 15 universities as part of this process, and we can then also ask them to learn from you because he's new to this space. Okay, if you're doing this in America, I can do this in East Africa. Dr. Mensah can do it in West Africa. Now we have, as opposed to those 5 universities, we have a global, I can certainly work on the Caribbean piece of it, and I'm going to probably have to adopt Andrea and I to help this process because she's just joining the community. But it takes everybody to help make this work. So, Jazz, I'm going to go with you first. Moving on from here, what's an actionable takeaway that we can bring to the conference in May as part of our conversation on how do we build out the world's biggest analog and get the university partnerships that we're looking for to spread the message?
So that's a great question. I guess from my point of view, the thing that where you can take action to, I guess, be involved and help with World's Biggest Analog, and then I'd like basically all these different countries, communities to be able to leverage what WBA, leverage the World's Biggest Analog and use that as a talking point. So if you are trying to achieve something on the education side, make that conversation more about this is a global thing that we're talking about here now. We're not just talking about, we're talking about the impact that this global event can have on our local community. We're talking about our involvement in a global event that's going to now have a positive effect on this global community. So I guess the actionable thing from our side is that we need partners in the education space. The more partners we have in the education space, the wider our reach will be. So if there's anybody listening to this or in this part of this wants to have a conversation about this, they can reach out directly to me. At the conference, I'll obviously be there. We're going to have many conversations around the World's Biggest Analog, and we might even have like a discussion session where we can brainstorm ideas. Even something like Claire, you mentioned a hackathon before. We could even run a few hackathons around, again, leveraging the World's Biggest Analog and turn this into like a big event. Create a little bit of hype around it, create a little bit of noise.
I'm loving that. I'm feeling that I volunteer to support the Analog Astronaut community in that, since I'll be there anyway. maybe I can turn it into part of the icebreaker I'm going to do. Who knows? We'll figure that out. Well, Dr. William. No, before that, let me get Zahir because he has to run. Dr. Zahir.
Oh, my apologies, Dr. Edmondson. I hope that's so impolite. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, friends. I do have to run sharply at the hour. So thank you, Dr. Claire. If I may make a couple of recommendations, I think there's a great example to follow with the way communities came together around the world with the eclipse. That I'm sure is in your mind, Jazz, and other members of the organizing team. But one thing that I do believe strongly that might support this is to create structure around participation and define it as such, because what happens sometimes is that universities that don't have the infrastructure or simply the capital are at a loss as to how to participate. So creating different ways and structures that are predefined, that you're a community, this is what you can do. You are a university at this level of resource, this is what you can do. and then connecting so that you have communities of practice at different layers of capability. So you create those horizontal connections around the world. Developing folks are nation folks are starting developing nation folks. They're organizing. They understand each other's problems, and then vertically mentorship and coaching, so that okay, right now you guys are going to, you know, as part of the analog, you're going to, you know, have a set of people do certain fasts and monitor them so you can add to the overall level of rich data around certain types of dietary restrictions in a harsh environment. That's something simple a group of 20 people could probably do at a low budget. But how does that then lead from that activity they're doing into the next level and the next level? So you could create opportunities of action. I love the old phrase, think globally, act locally. Saw a lot of that during the eclipse, but then also the vertical, the coaching and the mentorship, so that it's not a one-off, but you're creating relationships between different levels of capability and resource, so that people capacity can be built, pathways and pipelines to further opportunities for people are built throughout that community. So that I would recommend thinking about this as a two-dimensional problem in terms of how you're connecting people, both in terms of creating communities across the same level of capability and how we're going to do things in action and participate, but also the vertical ones where you have then somebody like ASU, which is an absolute giant and behemoth, can mentor 20 universities that are at a different scale around the world, perhaps. So would recommend that, and also take perhaps a similar approach on the commercial side. And I strongly recommend a commercial engagement strategy for the organizers, so that you say, look, we're organizing our communities. This is the type of data we're going to generate. This is the type of IP that may come out, and these are all the people we're going to train. How can you leverage this? How can we work together to leverage the data, the IP, and the people to support what you're doing on the commercial side? And in exchange for access to all of that, please support our event, equipment, personnel, cash, etc. So that's just one way of thinking about it. But I think the multidimensionality about it is both the tremendous opportunity, but it's also, of course, a tremendous challenge. So certainly I'll volunteer to support in my small way as I can, and of course make any introductions to the communities that I can access to the organizers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the participation.
Thank you. I always love it to have you among us. Take care. Dr. Monique, your point of view as somebody in Kenya who is trying to open new doors. I mean, the fact that Machakos has signed on to be the mothership of the Oasis project in Kenya is certainly a major starting point. When I offered Kenya, I didn't have a point of where we're going to start. At least we know we have a university lending us certain equipment for the lab, for some of the pilot tests we have to do before we actually do the physical location in Marsabit. We can do a test project in Machakos in your campus. So what are your thoughts in terms of an actionable insight for you? What would you want to say? I'm going to leave here and work on this next. Dr. Monique, unmute, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kriya. I think one of the actionable areas we can do is to develop. I can see in this panel we have people from academia, we have people from the industry, and this is going to create a good synergy. I think one of the areas that we can immediately work on and even establish is to have academia industry linkages. I think our colleague Ali is from industry, so we can easily create that linkages. I also agree with him that we also need that vertical relationship where some of our institutions, especially in Africa and Kenya, we really need to be mentored, even as we do our, depending on our equipment, depending on our capacity, there is that level we can comfortably participate, as we are also being mentored to participate even in more areas. So one way we can have is to have that industry academia linkages, which is really going to help us. And we can also have the collaboration between university in Machakos University and also universities in like University of Florida. We can have a partnership, and also the university in is it Caribbean where Jazz is. We can see how we can partner together. We can collaborate together so that now we create that synergy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Edmondson, the final word for you.
Okay, I would like to add to Zahir's, where he talked about commercial engagement, but I think we also need to address commercial creation, particularly for, the smaller nations to create their own space analog business, and at least get that in their head that they can do this. And also to create wealth within that, or within their national boundaries that also cut across other national boundaries. So I think that's key, and it's part of the education curriculum to be able to add that business aspect, because a lot of the CubeSat came out of the industries, came out of students graduating, seeing an opportunity in creating these businesses. And now we're actually, they're very strong commercial entities. So, but also from an education point is understand, and getting the young people to understand, why is this important? Why is space important? And to develop curriculum, to develop stories around the importance of space, how it affects them, how it could affect them, and maybe just set up a forum for K through 12 around getting them excited, because we need to hit them at the middle school, but continue that through the high school such that they choose the appropriate careers when they go into college. And appropriate is broad, is a broad statement. I'm not just talking engineers, the scientists, the business people, the storytellers, the movie makers, cinematographers, all of that, to help with that story.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to thank all of you for sharing. I'll thank Jazz for sharing her story. My takeaway is that I really believe that the world's biggest analog can be a catalyst for change in terms of having emerging countries participate in different ways. And I really believe that coming out of this and coming back from the conference and being at the conference this year, making sure that we're talking about it at the UN Summit of the Future, making sure we talk about the UN Summit on the Caribbean, small island states, that I'll be at that as well. In fact, I'm doing an online Futures Festival in May on the margins of the UN conference on small island states. And I'm going to set aside a huge 3 to 4 hour chunk of time again to talk about the importance of space for small islands and ways in which they can participate. And my hope is to invite universities, University of Pacific, universities in, Fiji, university in Seychelles, to talk about how they can use space for ocean or whatever. And maybe by that time, having come up to the conference in May, I'll find a way in which they can get involved in the world's biggest analog, just as a data point. Who knows what they can do from where they are. But I'm really excited about this. Thank you all. Thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Dr. Monique. Thank you, Dr. Edmondson. Thank Zahir in absence for being a part of this session. And I'm going to release you. And we're going to just shut down and come straight back for our final session is What's the Future? And we have a futurist join us, Adam Morris. And we have a young space entrepreneur, Abraham Akinwale, here to take us to the next session. So let me just stop the live stream and restart it. Thank you.